Hey guys, welcome back to more Entitled People Reddit stories. In this video, an entitled lawyer Karen showed up at my ranch and demanded I sign over my property, claiming I was too senile to remember giving her power of attorney. Big mistake on her end. Let's dive right into the video. And the title story starts like this. So I own a ranch and I've had it for many decades now. I didn't even know people wrote or read stories online, but my grandson said people might want to read this one and is helping me write it. He also told me what a Karen was. So my ranch is pretty fully functioning and has its own water source, barns and land that my whole family has worked on, including myself still. I know every inch of my ranch like it's the back of my hand, and actually I know most of the town that was too, the people living in it and everything. They seem to give me a lot of respect too, but this Karen lady showed up one day and introduced herself as a lawyer. She told me some big legal jargon that boiled down to her claiming that I had to give her my property. I might be older, but I'm not dumb, and told her that I was not signing over anything related to the ranch. She started going off about how she had some legal power of attorney over me and I did not remember because of my dementia. Well, just to be clear, I don't have that and my memory is actually sharper than most young people. I was the only one at the house at the time, so nobody else got to see what she was doing. I knew that even if I had dementia, I would put my daughter in charge of making my decisions, not some lawyer that I didn't even know. I asked her a few times to leave, but she flat out refused to do that. Instead, she got even more upset and pulled out a cell phone. She called the sheriff's office. I heard on the phone that she was claiming that I stole property and that I was using the ranch for some kind of criminal enterprise. I mean, I feed my horses only the best and take better care of them than I do myself at times. I was not a criminal or anything, and when the police showed up, they couldn't even do anything. They just started talking about it being a civil matter when Karen started saying I had to give her the property again. She wanted the cops to actually arrest me. I think if the cops did that, the sheriff would have a shock seeing me brought in, and we go way back by the way. However, I'm glad that they were not gonna arrest anybody and told Karen that she had to leave my property instead. But she actually came back again. This time she was trying to rope off my property, and when my grandson told me, I walked over and told her to stay away. She threatened to file lawsuits against me and have a lien put on my house, telling me again that she was the true owner and if I signed over the property then everything would stop. I think she was hoping that I was really old and confused. Maybe it's a new kind of scam to get elderly people to sign over their property without knowing exactly what they were doing. I went to go and check some county records because she was really starting to scare me about it. Maybe she was related to the owner before me and saw somewhere that she owned the property. Anyway, the records though just showed that I was the owner. Her real name was not listed anywhere, so I was really thinking this was simply a scam. When I checked those county records and saw her name nowhere, that is when I knew for sure that she was just full of hot air. But Karen was not done yet. A couple days later, I found orange fencing and cheap stakes set up along one of my pastures. She was literally trying to fence in part of my land as if she could just claim it by sight alone. My grandson took pictures right away and I told him to hang on to them because I had a feeling we would need proof down the line. That same week I got a notice in the mail. Karen had actually filed some kind of lien against my property claiming I owed her money. I laughed at first, but my grandson told me it wasn't funny because, fraudulent or not, paperwork like that can tie things up at the county if you ever need to sell or refinance your property, and that's when I decided I needed to fight her smart, not just yell at her to get lost. So I called up an old buddy of mine who works in the recorder's office and asked him to walk me through her filings. We pulled them up and sure enough it was all nonsense, wrong legal descriptions, forged signatures, and in one spot she literally wrote her own name over a line where my deed number should have gone. That wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. With my grandson's help we packaged everything up, her phony lien, photos of her roping off my land, and a written statement about her calling the cops with false accusations, and then we marched it straight over to the sheriff. He raised his eyebrows so high I thought his head might fall off. He said they would be opening an investigation because forgery and filing false documents with the county is a felony. Plus, off the record, he told me how he knew I had the land for decades and was the rightful owner. It didn't help me legally really, but it felt like to know that the sheriff was on my side. However, I wasn't finished yet. My grandson suggested we send a complaint to the State Bar Association. If she really was a lawyer, they would care about her abusing her license. We sent copies of everything and I figured nothing might come of it for a while. However, apparently, when a lawyer tries to steal an old man's ranch through fraud, it moves to the top of the pile. I mean, it still took months, but that is fast, according to my grandson. About a month later, I got an official notice. The county had invalidated her lien completely, and my deed was reaffirmed as mine and mine alone. On top of that, the sheriff's office was investigating her for fraud, and the state bar had slapped her with sanctions pending a hearing for disbarment. I wasn't even sure if she was a lawyer, but now hearing back from the bar, it actually turned out she was one. And I guess a pretty bad one too, if she couldn't afford her own place to live and scam people to get her money. I really hope that during the hearing she loses and cannot practice law anymore after abusing her power. Word got around town pretty quick, small towns talk, you know, and people already thought she was pushy, but now everyone knew she was crooked. She went from strutting around like she owned the place to ducking her head when she went into the diner. Last I heard, she packed up and left after her law office shut down. I even heard people telling me that they didn't know a law office even existed or that they never saw a single person going in there for help. I think maybe she just gave off a bit of a bad mojo to everybody, maybe she was a little too city or just people can smell a rotten egg, so to speak. As for me, I did not have to lift a finger beyond showing the truth. I kept my ranch, my water and my peace of mind, and my neighbors stopped by to congratulate me. One of them even said that all I did was provide the rope. She tied her own noose. So yeah, Karen thought she could outsmart me with big words and fake papers, but instead she lost her career and her reputation. All because she picked the wrong rancher to mess with. I do worry about other people that might fall for scams like this, which is why I think it's nice to put the story out there. Just because people are old does not mean that we can easily be taken advantage of. And yeah guys, that Karen was absolutely despicable. I hope she can never practice law again. Taking advantage of elderly people is just awful. Either way, the next one is a story from r/malicious compliance, and it is titled "Classmate is mad, I'm forcing her to eat ethnic food? Go eat a loaf of bread." This happened about a year ago now. When I was in high school, my calculus class was very chill. About 20 kids who were all friendly with each other, a laid-back but enthusiastic teacher, and a light enough workload that we could afford to goof off in class but still learn and do well. Well, at some point in the year, I got really into cooking. It's my stress reliever. My family couldn't possibly eat the amount of food I made, so I started bringing it into school and hosting Friday parties in my calc class with my teacher's approval, of course. Now, I'm Vietnamese and I live in a predominantly white town. This is only important because it meant that most kids from town only ate American or European foods and were not used to eating other ethnic food. Last year, around Lunar New Year, I wanted to bring in some Vietnamese foods to celebrate. It's a very important time of year for my family, and I ended up making some Vietnamese food, a steamed layer cake and a traditional Vietnamese dessert. Some of my friends from class found out I was gonna bring in a traditional dish and brought in their own traditional dishes from their own cultures, whether they celebrated Lunar New Year or not. We had different Indian, Korean, Filipino and Spanish desserts. It was great and I was really excited that my friends wanted to celebrate with me. Well, apparently this was an issue for one girl in my class. I would say banyalan is an acquired taste, so when not a lot of people ate it, I wasn't offended. I knew not everybody would like it. There was a lot of other food anyways, and during our lunch period, one of my friends, who was not in our class but knew I brought food in, overheard a girl from my class complaining about the food while on the lunch line. Apparently, she was saying really negative things about how I forced everyone to eat weird Chinese foods. Later that day I texted her just saying I heard she didn't like the food and wanted to know why. I don't really care when people don't like the food. I mean, I make it for myself and bring it in when I have extra anyways, but her calling it weird Chinese foods when she knows I'm Vietnamese didn't sit right with me. Well, she texted back saying that it was rude of you to bring in weird ethnic foods that nobody would have liked except for you, and said I should know better since most of the class was white. I told her that I bring in food to share because I feel like it and that I don't have an obligation to cater to her tastes. If she has an issue with it, she literally doesn't have to eat it, and other people can bring in food too. If she wanted to, she could bring in something more to her taste. After that, she just told me that I shouldn't bring in ethnic and foreign foods and stick with American foods because we're in America. Excuse me? Like, what? How much you wanna bet if I brought in jambalaya, which originated in Louisiana, she would call it a weird foreign food? Fine then, she only wants to eat American foods? Then she can eat American foods. The next week I brought in a bunch of oliebollen, a Dutch donut, and started passing them out at the beginning of class. When I got to her desk, I pulled out a loaf of Wonder Bread and plopped it on her desk saying, "Sorry, but these are Dutch, too ethnic, here you go, all American cuisine." Later, she texted me asking what the F my problem was, so I told her that almost every single food I brought in this year was ethnic and that it pissed me off she only had an issue when it wasn't European. She's entitled to not liking Asian foods, but if you're gonna complain about it being ethnic, then you better have that same attitude when the ethnic food is white. And especially don't call another person's culture weird. She didn't complain about the food again. Also, before anyone comments, white bread is not the only American cuisine out there. Here's a short list of what I've enjoyed making so far. Tater tots, jambalaya, fried chicken, many types of pies, s'mores and Philly cheesesteaks. America is a very diverse place and that's reflected in its food. Happy eating. And the next one is a fantastic petty revenge story that is titled, I caused my food-stealing roommate to make his mom cry. So this happened way back in 2013. I was living in a large space with 5 roommates. One of my roommates was known for borrowing food, including expensive stuff like meat, but then never replacing it. Well, one day I knew his mom was coming to visit and stay a few days, and his mom absolutely loved horses, so what I decided to do was bait this roommate with horse meat. It's not common in the US, but legal to buy imported, so I acquired some nice thin cuts and I sliced most of it and salted and left it in a Tupperware in the fridge, while the rest of the package with the horse meat store label in the freezer. Sure enough, in the evening I noticed some of the horses gone, so I make a big deal about someone stealing some of my horse meat in front of his mom. They go, haha, very funny. Sure, it's horse meat, and my roommate owns up to borrowing some meat he used to make him and his mom steak and eggs for breakfast and lies that he'll replace it. That's when I pull out the package from the freezer and prove that it was in fact horse meat, and his mom burst into tears crying to her son, "How could you feed me horses?" He definitely at least stopped borrowing my meat after that. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So I got a nice 3-bedroom house on a large corner lot in a quiet suburban neighborhood. When I first moved there back in the mid-80s, there was no homeowner association and not many neighbors either, since the area was not very developed yet. I got the entire piece of land fairly cheap and then built the house largely by myself. It was just a nice laid-back community where folks mostly kept to themselves but were friendly enough if you passed them on the street. Well, that all changed many years ago when a group of busybody neighbors decided that we needed an HOA to protect property values and maintain community standards. However, I wanted no part of it from day one. I have always believed that a man's home is his castle, and I didn't need some petty tyrants telling me what color to paint my shutters or how tall my grass could be. When they first formed the HOA, a couple of board members came knocking on my door with their clipboards and fake smiles trying to get me to sign up. No thanks, I told them firmly. I'm not interested in joining. But Mr. Johnson, one of them said in a syrupy sweet voice, don't you want to have a say in how our neighborhood is run and protect your property values? I just shook my head and said, my property values are just fine, ma'am, and I already have a say. It's called voting in local elections and following the existing laws. I don't need another layer of bureaucracy telling me what to do with my own home. They tried a few more times over the next year or so to convince me, but I held firm. Eventually, they seemed to give up and move on to hassling other neighbors. Little did I know that was just the beginning of my troubles with the HOA. At first, it was just petty annoyances. They would leave passive-aggressive notes on my door about my lawn being a quarter-inch too tall or my holiday decorations not conforming and keeping up with the neighborhood aesthetics. I mostly ignored them, but it was irritating. Then they started getting bolder. One summer, I came home to find a couple of HOA board members in my backyard measuring my fence. Excuse me? I said as I approached them. But what exactly do you think you're doing on my property? The HOA president, Karen, yes, her actual name was Karen, turned to me with a look of disdain. We are just confirming that your fence meets HOA guidelines. Section 3, paragraph 2 clearly states that all fences must be no taller than 6 feet. I felt my blood pressure rising. First of all, I'm not a member of your HOA, so your guidelines don't even apply to me. Second, this is my private property and you are trespassing. Get out of my yard now before I call the police. Karen huffed indignantly. Well, I never. We're just trying to maintain standards around here. Your non-compliance is bringing down everyone's property values. My property values are just fine, I shot back. Now get off my lawn before I show you how we dealt with trespassers back in my military days. That seemed to finally get through to them and they scurried away, but I knew this was not over. Over the next few years the harassment continued and even escalated. They would call the city to report imaginary code violations. They tried to tow my project car that I kept in my driveway, claiming it was an eyesore. One time I even caught some of them trying to paint my mailbox to bring it into compliance while I was at work. Each time I would push back, calling the police for trespassing, filing complaints with the city, sending cease and desist letters. It was exhausting. But I refused to let them bully me into joining their little dictator club. Things finally came to a head last year. I had taken a 6-month contract job overseas, good money, but it meant being away from home for an extended period of time. I had a friend house sitting and checking on the place regularly, but he was not around day to day. About 4 months into my contract, I got a frantic call from my house sitter Tom. "Dave man, you're not gonna believe this," he said, sounding stressed. "I came by to mow the lawn like usual and there's construction going on in your backyard." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean, construction?" Tom's voice was incredulous. "I mean, there are bulldozers and concrete mixers and a whole crew of guys building something back there on your property. It looks like they are putting in a pool or something." I was stunned silent for a moment, trying to process what he was telling me. "Did you talk to anyone? Find out what's going on?" "Yeah, I tried," Tom replied, "but they just said that they had all the proper permits and to take it up with the HOA if I had any questions." "Dave, I think the HOA is building some kind of community pool on your property." I felt a wave of rage wash over me. Those idiots had finally gone too far. "Tom, I need you to do a few things for me right away," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "First, call the police and report this as trespassing and vandalism. Then take lots of photos and videos of everything. The construction, any paperwork or permits you can see, the workers, just everything. Can you do that for me?" "Yeah, of course," Tom said. "What are you gonna do?" I took a deep breath. "I'm booking the next flight home. This ends now." The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic travel arrangements, sleepless nights, and barely contained fury. By the time I finally pulled into my driveway, I was running on nothing but caffeine and righteous anger. The scene in my backyard was even worse than I had imagined. A huge swath of my lawn had been torn up and the framework of what looked like a pool house was already taking shape. Construction equipment and materials were strewn everywhere. I marched up to the first person I saw in a hard hat. "Who's in charge here?" I demanded. The worker looked confused. That would be Mr. Stevens, the foreman. He's over there in the white truck." I stormed over to the truck and rapped on the window. A middle-aged man with a bushy mustache rolled it down. "Can I help you?" "Yeah, you can help me by explaining what the hell do you think you're doing on my property?" I growled. The foreman furrowed his brow. "Your property?" "No, dude, this is HOA common land. We have all the proper permits to build the new community pool here." I felt my face getting hot. "I don't know what the HOA told you, but this is absolutely not common or public land. This is my private property that I've owned for over 30 years. You need to stop work immediately and get your equipment off my land." "Look, buddy," the foreman said, clearly annoyed. "I don't know what your problem is, but we have signed contracts and permits. Take it up with the HOA if you have issues. I'm just here to do a job." I realized I was not going to get anywhere with this guy. "Fine, but you'll be hearing from my lawyer very soon. I suggest you wrap things up here quick." I turned and headed for my car, pulling out my phone. I had some calls to make. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal action. I hired the meanest bulldog of a property lawyer I could find, and we immediately filed for an emergency injunction to stop the construction. We also began putting together a massive lawsuit against the HOA for trespassing, property damage, fraud, and a laundry list of other charges. The HOA of course tried to claim that my property was actually common public land that had been deeded over to them years ago. But their so-called evidence was flimsy at best and obviously fabricated. They had forged documents, backdated contracts, the works. It was clear that they'd been planning this for a long time, thinking they could get away with it while I was out of the country. The case moved quickly, thanks in large part to the mountain of evidence my house sitter Tom had gathered. The photos and videos clearly showed the HOA members directing the construction on my land. We even had audio of Karen, the HOA president, explicitly stating that they were going to take care of the troublemaker Johnson once and for all. As the legal proceedings unfolded, I learned even more about just how far the HOA had gone in their quest to force me out. They had been spreading lies about me to my neighbors for years, claiming I was running a drug lab or that I was a convicted SEX offender. They had tried multiple times to get the city to condemn my property on false pretenses. The more that came out, the more outraged the judge became. In the end, it was not even close. The HOA's case fell apart completely under scrutiny. The final ruling came down like a hammer. The judge was not only ruling in my favor on all counts, but went even further. The HOA was ordered to pay for all damages to my property and cover the costs of removing the half-built pool house. They were hit with massive punitive damages for their fraud and harassment, and in a particularly satisfying twist, the judge ordered the HOA to be dissolved entirely, ruling that they had acted in bad faith and abused their authority. As we left the courthouse after the final hearing, my lawyer turned to me with a grin. "In all my years of practice, I've never seen an HOA get spanked that hard. You just made history, my friend." I couldn't help but smile. Well, they messed with the wrong Marine. Semper Fi. The aftermath was almost as satisfying as the court victory. Karen and several other HOA board members were charged with multiple felonies for fraud and forgery, and last I heard she was even facing serious prison time. My property, meanwhile, was fully restored at the HOA's expense, and I used some of the settlement money to put in my own pool, positioned perfectly so the former HOA members could see me enjoying it from their windows. However, the best part was the reaction from my neighbors. It turned out a lot of them had actually been suffering under the HOA's petty tyranny for years, but I had been too afraid to speak up. Once the truth came out, I had people coming by for weeks to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to them. One of my neighbors, an older lady named Ruth, even baked me a cake. She came by one afternoon with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I cannot thank you enough for what you've done. Seriously, those horrible people fined me thousands of dollars over the years for the silliest things. My flower beds, my bird feeders. I was afraid I would lose my home. You're a hero." I was touched by her gratitude, but I just shook my head. "I'm no hero, ma'am. I just believe in standing up to bullies. Nobody has the right to tell you what to do with your own property." These days, the neighborhood is peaceful again, just like when it was when I first moved in all those years ago. People mind their own business for the most part, but there's a new sense of community too. We look out for each other now, but without any heavy-handed rulers or ridiculous fines. As for me, I'm enjoying my retirement in peace, puttering in my garden, working on my project car, and yes, lounging by my new pool. Sometimes I'll catch one of the former HOA busybodies glaring at me from down the street. I just wave and smile. After all, I fought for this country to protect our freedoms, and sometimes that fight starts right in your own backyard. And the next one is a funny petty revenge story, which is titled, "Poured him the cheap $8 wine all day." So I was working bar at a VIP event and went to the fridge to get more stock. I was gone maybe 45 seconds, and in that time, some self-important a-hole came behind the bar, cracked a bottle of expensive white, and poured himself 2 huge glasses. The guests all knew they were not supposed to go behind or access the bar. It was an open bar with a lot of expensive wine. I made sure that every time he came to the bar for the rest of the day, I served him Jacob's Creek, a nasty cheap wine, irregardless what he asked for. It was my own personal FU. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like the video, and I will see you again tomorrow.